We are back. This is episode number 68 of Calibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. We have a lot to talk about today, but first, if you guys support my work, the easiest way you can help me is just by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video. Commenting also helps. If you have something you would like to say, throw it down there. That helps me, and I do look at the comments, so feel free to put in questions down there. I might try to answer them. It might give me ideas. If you want to support me financially, if you have the means and you would like some extra content, please subscribe to my Patreon. There is one video up there. Another one will be going up sometime this next week. And yeah, I'm going to put more non-important videos in that, like not as much updates about the Ukraine situation and stuff like that. But they are fun. They will be more relaxed. I might do some where I smoke or something like that. So they'll be interesting and funny videos on there if you guys are interested in that. But without further ado, let's just get right into it. I'm going to start with the counteroffensive. What's been going on? We are now at day 104, I want to say, of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. It should culminate in about 3 to 4 weeks. The weather is going to start shifting here dramatically, and the mud will just become impossible for the Ukrainian military to deal with, and the Russian military. There won't be a lot of movement from either side. I do expect one last big push from the Ukrainians somewhere. I don't know if that's going to be Bakhmut, where they've actually seen some success, or down in the south where the actual goal of the Ukrainian counteroffensive lies. So it is yet to be seen, but I do expect that we will see one last big push, one last effort before it becomes impossible to do so. But let's just get more specific. Around Rybitny, the main axis of advance for the Ukrainians, we've seen almost no progress. We had reports that the Ukrainians were across the first line of defense around Verbove. That turned out to be true, but it was just light infantry. We still, going on about 2 weeks now, have yet to see a vehicle actually cross this line, be geolocated beyond the vehicle barriers, which is the reason why they're there. And the Ukrainians are taking substantial infantry losses on the other side of this. They just get hit by artillery or FPV drones. They just don't really have anywhere to hide out in the open, and they don't have any armor protection, and they don't have air defense following them over. So these infantry units are wildly exposed. That's at least the situation right now. Obviously, that could change, but the Russians are holding firm. This has just become basically a Kherson 2.0, where the Ukrainians have got themselves into a gut. They are losing extraordinarily. They're sustaining extraordinarily high casualties in this area. We have a picture. It's a screenshot of a post. It was put up by somebody from the 47th Mechanized Brigade, which was the Leopard AMX brigade with the Bradleys that was supposed to get a lot of work done. They got chewed up in the beginning. They're still there fighting, just in a very reduced capacity. They might have even been moved out by this time. But one of their soldiers put up a post acknowledging losses for a single day in the Rybitny sector of the front. So just in this little pocket, the Ukrainians lost 13 KIA, 63 wounded in action. And so that is just in one small area, right, of the front. And those are substantial losses. This could be a high loss day. We don't want to apply this overall, but let's just say 50 casualties total instead of the 76 we see here. That reduces the wounded in action by, say, 20 and the killed in action by, 6. So, you're looking at 50 casualties a day. I think that's a fair estimate per brigade in this region where the Russians have a lot of attention and focus. That would equate out to if let's just say there's 6 brigades in this region, which I think there are more, but let's just say 6. That would put the losses at 300 men per day in this sector alone, and that's barring high days and low days. That's just an average. those are substantial losses. Those are untenable losses, and that's what's going on in this sector of the front. On the Vermitsky Ledge, I think that's how you pronounce it, there have been almost no movements. The Ukrainians are still taking casualties here, but the pushing has definitely not been as hard. This sector of the front has really died down. I don't think the Ukrainians are having much success here, and there's just not a lot of attention being focused here. On the Bakhmut front, the Ukrainians now have full control over Kleshchivka. The Russians are just on the outside of the village, so the actual control inside the village is very tentative. That could change rapidly if the Russians decided to counterattack. I don't know if they really will. If you look at a map, and I'll throw one up here, the front line has actually leveled out on the Bakhmut front. For this pressure around Kleshchivka and potentially Andriivka, it's still in the gray zone, but it could fall into Ukrainian hands. By the way, these places are just completely level. They'll try to get some pictures up in here of Kleshchivka and Andriivka. They are just flat. Their buildings have been reduced. There weren't many buildings to begin with. These are pretty small settlements, but they've been completely reduced to rubble. So it's really the high ground around these towns that's the important aspect. And the Ukrainians have gained advantageous high ground around Kleshchivka in particular, that they already had. Really capturing the town doesn't do much for them, gives them a little bit of buffer zone, but they have this high ground that they can now threaten the southern end of Bakhmut with. But there's no pressure being applied at the top of the salient. I guess you would call it salient. The Ukrainians are pushing down like this and up like this, and on the bottom they're having some success. That's where they're focusing a lot, but on the top they have almost no success. They've just been hitting a brick wall and sustaining once again high casualties in this area. So I don't really understand what the point of pushing here is. You're wasting a lot of very, very motivated fighters in this region. A lot of Azov have been reduced here, and in the south as well, it looks like Azov is now going to be moved down there, which means that there's probably going to be a big push in this region. They're kind of like a no retreat brigade that gets brought in and motivates, however you want to describe that. But they're being moved. So I think the Ukrainians might be sort of calling it quits around Bakhmut. They've secured Kleshchivka. They've created a buffer zone away from Chasiv Yar. The Russians are going to have to really commit to push that out. And they need to make something happen in the south. So I think that's where the attention is going. Up in the north, the Russians have been still applying moderate pressure, really not committing anything major in this region. Just, they push a little bit, force Ukrainian rotations, and then just hammer the Ukrainians, hammer until they need to rotate again. And then the Russians do another little push. And then once reserves are brought in, they hammer. So that's just kind of the ebb and flow of the battle up there. The Russians are really just sitting back, letting the Ukrainians wear themselves out. And then, maybe in the winter, the Russians will make a push. I think that it would be a good idea to push while the Ukrainians are weak. You never know, that they might try to do another Bakhmut, maybe Chasiv Yar, or one of these cities, and make the Ukrainians continue to attrit themselves in these urban battles with artillery disadvantage. Who knows? The Russian plans are as a mystery to me as they are to you. So we'll just have to wait and see. We have seen a substantial increase in FPV strikes. These are the drones that have the RPGs attached to them, and the Russians are using these to great efficiency, especially in the south. Basically, now I have seen videos of these things just hovering over tree lines, just scanning, searching, going back and forth. When they find something, they fly in and hit it. And mostly they're light vehicles, transport vehicles, and the Ukrainians are sustaining, once again, heavy losses due to these FPV drones. I'll put up a graph here, or I'll try to if I can find it. A lot of these things I see and I add them into my analysis, but I don't always save them. So I'll do my best to look for it. But it's a graph of basically the recorded FPV strikes over the last couple months. And this month has just exploded. We're already on the 18th. We're further past every other month in terms of quantity of FPV strikes that have been posted. We don't get to see all of the ones that get posted, especially the ones that fail. So you got to think that this number is probably double what it is shown here. Just because, they're not always hitting their targets. Sometimes they get shot down. But the thing to take away from this is that the Russian drone game has improved exponentially. I mean, the Ukrainians are now the massive underdog when it comes to FPVs and loitering munitions. And I do believe that in the coming months, the Russians will introduce some form of heavy strike drone or loitering munition, whether that's something akin to the Chinese Sunflower, which is basically their Garen 2. People are calling it a ripoff, but really it's a much better version because it has IR cameras. So it can fly around, look for something to attack, and then, go in for it. Whereas the Garen 2s that the Russians have are just preset coordinates meant to hit static targets like HQs, oil facilities, whatever it is, ports, which is what they've been using it a lot for recently. And as we speak right now, Lvov is getting absolutely pummeled by Russian drones. So that is something to keep an eye on. We'll see how it progresses over the coming months. But I think it's only going to get worse and worse. And I think that the Russians are probably trying to, I don't know if the Russians are planning to mobilize. This is something that I've been wanting to talk about. I think I'm going to dedicate a whole video to it. What mobilization means. I could definitely see a 500,000 to 700,000 man mobilization in the coming months. I think the Russians should be preparing to fight the next enemy, whatever that may be, if any. But they could mobilize, they could not. There's a lot of rumors going around about if they need it or not. But I think that the Russians are going to try to compensate with massive drone production. And we'll see how well that turns out for them. I mean, it's always a gamble to, go in a new direction and rely on a new technology. But I do think that they have been significantly effective, and they will continue using them in great numbers, because why wouldn't they? I mean, it's an RPG. You can fly through a car window. It's pretty effective. We did have an escalation that I wanted to talk about, and that came in the form of the Sevastopol dry dock that was struck. This is a port facility that's in Sevastopol, Crimea, the southern part of Crimea, and it was recently struck by multiple Storm Shadow cruise missiles, or what are thought to be Storm Shadow cruise missiles. That's what the Russians claim. I think that's what the Ukrainians claim. They've openly admitted it now. So this is a very big deal. This is a direct escalation. This is crossing a Russian red line, the invisible Russian red lines that a lot of people like to make fun of. But they shot 10 in this salvo. 7 were intercepted, or so it was claimed by the Russian government, and 3 hit their targets, which was a landing ship that was in maintenance and dry dock, and a Kilo class submarine that was in maintenance and dry dock. We've gotten some pictures, some very far away pictures. Some people say that there's a leaked photo. I don't know if I'm going to add them because they kind of look AI edited, especially the submarine photo. And there is a hole in the side of the submarine, which makes me think that something fishy is going on, because these are top-down cruise missiles. They kind of come in like this, go up, and then hit their target. And that's not really the hole that's left with that kind of munition. And I was expecting it to be a little bit more significant of damage. I mean, you have a 400 kg warhead hitting a submarine. Submarines are not really that impressive for their structural strength. So, when it comes to taking missile impacts, they're not. We'll just have to, I'm going to wait and see on that, I think. But I mean, I'm going to go ahead and classify a Kilo class submarine, as destroyed, and a Russian landing ship as also destroyed. What are the impacts of this? The Russians aren't using these right now. They're in dry dock for maintenance. 3 to 6 months usually is how long they're in for. These vessels are not a significant loss to the Black Sea Fleet. I mean, the Russians weren't going to be doing any landings anytime soon, I don't think. So, not a big loss there. The submarine is a missile launch vessel, but the Russians have 63 remaining Kilo class submarines, so it's not that big of a deal. The Black Sea Fleet basically could be completely destroyed, and it doesn't really change much about the Ukraine war. Really, the aviation and missile capabilities of the Russian Federation cover the Black Sea. So the fleet is something nice to have. It's an additional tool to use, but unless we're not even close to the entire Black Sea Fleet being destroyed. But even if it was, it has in the past, and it hasn't meant the end of the Russian, country itself. So it's not a huge loss. And the reason why it was struck was because it is a very immobile, very sensitive target. And it was something that the Ukrainians could hit. Everybody was very excited about this. I mean, it looks like a big deal, ooh, they got a submarine, fantastic. It just doesn't change anything. There's a meme, I'll put it up right here. And if you look at this, it's kind of funny. This is what we should be focusing on. The Ukrainians have moved 8 to 12 kilometers over the last 104 days and lost tens of thousands of men and hundreds of armored vehicles and tanks. That's the real battle. Deep strikes are fun. They're flashy. They make big explosions and they get people's attention, but they don't change the tide of war. The Russians have been launching, hundreds and hundreds more missiles, drones at Ukraine every day. And it is making, it has an impact, but it's not winning the war for Russia. At least right now, we haven't seen that. The Ukrainians cover everything up very well, so we don't know what's actually happening behind the scenes. A little thunder. Sorry, it's raining outside. But we don't know what's happening behind the scenes, and these strikes could be doing very little. They could be doing a lot. The Ukrainian strikes are less significant and less in quantity. So it's not something you really need to focus on. It's something that I do cover extensively on both my Telegram and Twitter, but it doesn't change the situation in Robitny. And that's what the Ukrainians need. They need something to change there. This is just another distraction, another morale boost, another look to the West saying, look, you can escalate all you want and the Russians aren't going to do anything. I've been a strong proponent of the Russians responding just from a military strategy and geopolitical strategy standpoint. I think that a strong response would put the Western, allies on their heels and force them to make difficult decisions regarding things like ATACMS delivery in the future, which is something that the Ukrainians are pushing really hard for. Zelensky is in New York right now to try to get that out, get that announcement. Once again, they're not going to ever be delivered in the numbers required to actually cause significant change, but it's another, oh man, that thunder is cracking out there. It's something that's never going to, it's never going to change anything on the battlefield. And Storm Shadow cruise missiles are a lot harder to intercept than ATACMS. So time will tell, but this strike was pretty minor, significant in the embarrassment factor for the Russians, but in terms of how it affects the battlefield, it's close to none. I did want to cover a few articles that were brought up both by the New York Times. One is titled, and I'll put it up here, Russia overcomes sanctions by expanding. Oh, wait, no. Russia overcomes sanctions and expands its missile production. So this is one of the biggest copes that we've heard for the entire conflict, is that, these sanctions are putting so much pressure on the Russian technology sector that they're not going to be able to produce things like computers and microchips and the technology they need for the guidance systems for their missiles and the all the different components that are the higher technological aspects of these weapons are going to be extremely restricted because of all these sanctions that the West is putting on Russia. Unfortunately, they highly underestimated the willingness of China and some of the Southeast Asian countries to provide chip technology to Russia after the invasion, as well as Russia's own capability to produce the required parts for their weapons. Russian missile production has probably gone through the roof. They probably have a surplus of missiles now compared to a year ago when they were really running through them. And this is a pretty big admission. Sanctions failed. It failed to do the thing it was expected to do: destroy the Russian economy and prevent the Russians from being able to really get their war machine going. And now it's going. So really, the sanctions have probably negatively affected the West, especially Germany and some of these other European countries more than they've actually affected Russia, which is, sanctions are always a double-edged sword. You always have to expect the repercussions of those sanctions. And we're seeing them now. Germany's in a recession. They're deindustrializing at a pace that's unprecedented, and it's just going to continue to escalate. And as soon as that first domino falls, the rest of Europe will follow suit. Another article we saw was from the New York Times, which is very telling because this is a very pro-Ukrainian outlet, mainstream media outlet. And the New York Times is talking about what's next for Ukraine. And this is important because it's coming on the back of a strategic failure in this counteroffensive. And they're asking what's next. They're putting up the possibility of reduced support from the West, manpower issues, technology issues. All these different things are coming to a head. I think this was the last real big hoorah for Ukraine. I think everybody kind of knows that now. John Kirby was just in Ukraine. I believe that he was there delivering some unfortunate news. That would have been the perfect opportunity when Kirby went to Ukraine. He hadn't been there for a year since the Kharkov and Kherson counteroffensive. He came after this counteroffensive, basically. It's basically over. And said, we're with Ukraine, but also Ukraine probably needs to start negotiating to maintain its sovereignty. You're starting to see the language shift. It's no longer whatever it takes, however long it takes. It's now, hey, we might need to negotiate. And that's going to be incredibly difficult because Zelensky has said basically and put it into Ukrainian law, that nobody's allowed to negotiate with the Russians. That's unfortunate because Zelensky is now in this extremely high pressure situation where he has the West wanting him to negotiate, freeze the conflict, probably Korean style or Berlin style, and move to this sort of frozen conflict phase where they can rearm Ukraine and basically make it so the Russians will never be able to encroach again without taking on a whole nother Ukrainian army again, which the Russians don't want to do. That's a big undertaking, especially if it's a fully NATO equipped army. I mean, it's whatever you think about NATO, whatever you think about the Russians, they're both fighting very hard in Ukraine, and they are making each other question different things about their tactics and strategies. So the Russians don't want to fight another Ukraine. I don't think that the Russians are going to allow any sort of Syrian or, Korean style freezing of this conflict. I just don't think it's in the books. I personally would not allow it, depending on how the domestic situation is with Russia. I can't see behind everything. I can't crack open all the books and see what's going on, but things look stable. And for the Russians, things being stable means that they can continue their war in a way that benefits them. They are in the position of strength. The Ukrainian counteroffensive just failed. Any negotiations that are going to happen, the Russians are going to be in an extreme place of power, and I don't think the West is going to be okay with that. Even if there are negotiations, I don't really see them going anywhere because the the goalposts are shifted so far away from each other for both sides that there's never going to be an agreed settlement. You know, Putin even said in his recent meeting, he went and met with the Korean president, Kim Jong-un, in somewhere in Eastern Russia. I can't remember where, but way east, just above North Korea. And at that conference, he basically said, I actually think it wasn't just a meeting with Kim Jong Un. I think it was a whole economic forum with Asian countries. I could be wrong. I could be wrong on that. I actually can't remember exactly. I know he recently was at a conference with a bunch of these Southeast Asian countries, and that was a very big deal, or Asian countries, and that was a very big deal because, in the Western media, they were completely ignoring it. I think they were just making it out to be Putin meeting Kim, the two isolated leaders. This is how desperate Putin is. He's going to Kim for ammunition, which he very well could have been. And, Kim can solve that problem for him very easily. In terms of the ammunition that they could provide, and then the Russians can provide technology, whether it's missile technologies or whatever the North Koreans need. There's a lot of they have a very strong and long relationship, and the Chinese also seem to be on board with the North Koreans doing this. So there's a lot of cooperation going on, and that should be very concerning for the West. But at this meeting, Putin basically laid it out and said, how can we ever negotiate with the Ukrainians when they have a law that says that they're not allowed to negotiate with us? So Zelensky is under this immense pressure because he either has to negotiate, which means that the end for him politically in Ukraine. If he goes and negotiates, that's it. He's done. He has pressure from the right sector in Ukraine, which once again, politically, he would be done. He would probably honestly get ousted in some way. But then the West, who is bankrolling this whole thing, and is keeping Ukraine on life support, is telling him, hey, you need to go negotiate. I mean, he's in the squisher. He made that choice last year when he listened to Boris Johnson instead of negotiating a peace settlement in Istanbul. And, right after which made this law saying we can never negotiate with the Russians. I think it's very important that everybody maintains a very close eye on the goalposts here. Remember, before the counteroffensive, all the talk was 1991 borders, territorial integrity of Ukraine, securing Crimea from the Russians, or making it at least untenable for them to stay in. That all that's going to shift, especially if negotiations start. You're going to be looking at territorial secessions and probably some sort of guarantees. Once again, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that the only way this ends is through regime change, and then probably either a Russian puppet or a Western puppet that's put in place that negotiates on behalf of the West for whatever they deem to be a reasonable cost. I think Zelensky's time is now. I think Zelensky's time, he's on the clock now with this failed offensive. He's got to produce something, or it's over. We're going into an election year, and that's going to be incredibly difficult for Biden to continue supplying weapons to Ukraine, especially after a failed offensive. The Republicans are starting to get very, very aggressive against Biden. They've actually started an investigation into impeachment for Biden for his business dealings with China and Ukraine. So he needs to probably distance himself from that. His son, Hunter Biden, has been indicted on 3 separate gun charges. So, the Republicans are smelling the blood in the water, and they're going to go after Biden very hard coming into this next election cycle. So, they're on the clock. The Ukrainians are on the clock. They gotta figure out what they're doing. And all of these Western articles are really pointing to that. It's a very big deal that all this language has shifted. Once again, the narrative is shifting. It shifted in the middle of the counteroffensive. I made a video about that. And now it's shifting even further as they're figuring out that this thing has completely failed and Ukraine is probably getting close to exhausted. I think that's all I wanted to cover today. Thank you guys so much. On the lookout for that Patreon video. Once again, if you want to support me, follow me on Telegram, Twitter, my Patreon, if you want to support me financially. And if you guys can't financially support me, don't worry about it. This is not about making money. This is about getting information out there. I want to do this full time. So that's really what I'm hoping to get out of this. But all of the important information will always be free on YouTube. And if I get taken off YouTube, I'll be on Rumble or I'll just post on Telegram. I honestly don't care. I love doing this. I love getting on here and talking about this. I follow this stuff and I'd follow it even if I wasn't making videos. So if you want to support me, I thank you guys so much for all of you who have supported me and all of you who want to support me. It means so much to me, and it really gets me in this chair and making these videos. And, on my Telegram, posting videos, and on my Twitter, you know, making jokes and posting videos and stuff. I just love it. And I love you guys. So take care and have a great day. And I'll catch you next time. Bye.